Ricoseta Mafella. He flew the last flight to leave Indonesia's Palu airport before disaster struck.
In aviation, every second is scheduled. Every action is rehearsed. But on the evening of September 28, 2018, one pilot broke the rule that keeps the skies predictable, and in doing so, crossed the thin line between order and oblivion. Captain Ricoseta Mafella, veteran of more than 18 years in Indonesian skies, felt something no checklist could explain. A whisper deep in his mind. It said only one thing. Go now. 3 minutes early. 3 minutes before the Earth below would tear itself apart. Flight 6231 was supposed to be routine. A short evening hop from Palu to Makassar across the Indonesian archipelago. The weather was perfect. The sky over Sulawesi glowed orange from the setting sun. Inside the cockpit, Captain Ricoseta Mafella adjusted his seat, reviewed his checklist, and ran through the ritual he had performed hundreds of times. Nothing in the instruments warned of danger. Pressure steady, crosswind mild, visibility flawless. Yet, something felt wrong. Palu is a city built in a bowl of mountains, lying at the narrow mouth of a long bay that cuts deep into Sulawesi. Beneath its calm surface, three of the planet's great tectonic plates, the Eurasian, Pacific, and Australian, grind together. Small tremors are common. Residents barely notice them anymore. But that evening, long before any shaking began, Mafella felt a heaviness in his chest, a quiet insistence that grew stronger with every passing second. He would later describe it in interviews with Compass TV and BBC Indonesia as a whisper I couldn't ignore. It wasn't panic. It wasn't superstition. It was a certainty rising from somewhere deeper than thought. Aviation depends on discipline. Every minute of departure time is calculated to prevent collisions in crowded Indonesian airspace. Taking off early means stepping outside that lattice of coordination. Pilots are trained never to improvise, especially not with 148 lives behind them. Still, Mafella's hand reached for the radio. Tower, Batik 6231, ready for immediate departure. There was a pause, long enough for his co-pilot to glance over, uncertain. Then came the calm reply from the tower. Batik 6231, cleared for takeoff. The voice belonged to Antonius Gunawan Agong, a 21-year-old controller on duty at the Mutiara Sis Al Jufriya airport. He spoke with the steady tone of a professional who had given that clearance 1,000 times before. At 6:02 p.m., 3 minutes ahead of schedule, the aircraft surged forward. The runway lights became streaks of gold beneath them. The jet lifted, wheels folding into the belly, engines rising to a smooth hum. Below, the city lights of Palu flickered like scattered fireflies against the darkening bay. To everyone on board, it was just another peaceful ascent. To everyone still on the ground, the countdown to catastrophe had already begun. Those 3 minutes would become one of the narrowest escapes in aviation history. From the cockpit, Palu looked peaceful, its lights strung along a coastline that curled inward like a silver hook. The captain didn't know that beneath those lights ran one of the most dangerous geological seams on Earth. The Palu Koro Fault had been building pressure for decades, a fault line where the Australian, Pacific, and Eurasian plates grind past each other at nearly 42 millimeters per year. When it ruptured at 6:05 p.m., the shock raced through the crust at the speed of sound. The entire valley shuddered. Hillsides cracked open, releasing plumes of dust that turned the dusk into a copper haze. The geometry of Palu Bay transformed that quake into a perfect trap. The bay is only 2 kilometers wide at its mouth, but stretches more than 30 kilometers inland. Its floor drops steeply and then rises suddenly near the shore, an underwater funnel designed by nature to amplify disaster. When the seabed heaved upward, it displaced millions of cubic meters of water that had nowhere to go but forward. Tide gauge records later showed the first wave striking the shoreline less than 6 minutes after the initial rupture. Eyewitnesses recalled watching the sea retreat hundreds of meters, revealing coral heads and stranded fish. People ran onto the sand, filming with phones, unaware they were staring at the mouth of a 10-meter-high tsunami. When the water returned, it came as a wall. Gray, silent at first, then roaring. Entire streets disappeared. Concrete bridges snapped in half. The soil itself turned liquid. Entire districts like Potobo and Ballaroa were swallowed as the ground beneath them liquefied and flowed like wet cement. Buildings didn't collapse. They sank. If you stood on that beach and watched the ocean suddenly retreat, would you have understood what was coming? Would instinct have told you to run? Or would curiosity have held you in place? Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in that moment? By nightfall, electricity failed. Communications cut out. The airport's single runway, the one that had launched Flight 6231 just minutes earlier, split open along its center line. The tower above it tilted, windows shattered, stairways crumbling. Had the plane remained on the ground, it would have been trapped between ruptured asphalt and oncoming water. The passengers, now floating calmly above the clouds, had escaped a catastrophe measured in megatons, not minutes. From the cockpit, Palau looked peaceful, its lights strung along a coastline that curled inward like a silver hook. The captain didn't know that beneath those lights ran one of the most dangerous geological seams on Earth. The Palau Coro Fault had been building pressure for decades, a fault line where the Australian, Pacific, and Eurasian plates grind past each other at nearly 42 millimeters per year. When it ruptured at 6:05 p.m., the shock raced through the crust at the speed of sound. The entire valley shuddered. Hillsides cracked open, releasing plumes of dust that turned the dusk into a copper haze. The geometry of Palau Bay transformed that quake into a perfect trap. The bay is only 2 kilometers wide at its mouth, but stretches more than 30 kilometers inland. Its floor drops steeply and then rises suddenly near the shore, an underwater funnel designed by nature to amplify disaster. When the seabed heaved upward, it displaced millions of cubic meters of water that had nowhere to go but forward. Tide gauge records later showed the first waves striking the shoreline less than 6 minutes after the initial rupture. Eyewitnesses recalled watching the sea retreat hundreds of meters, revealing coral heads and stranded fish. People ran onto the sand, filming with phones, unaware they were staring at the mouth of a 10-meter-high tsunami. When the water returned, it came as a wall, gray, silent at first, then roaring. Entire streets disappeared. Concrete bridges snapped in half. The soil itself turned liquid. Entire districts like Potobo and Ballaroa were swallowed as the ground beneath them liquefied and flowed like wet cement. Buildings didn't collapse, they sank. By nightfall, electricity failed. Communications cut out. The airport's single runway, the one that had launched Flight 6231 just minutes earlier, split open along its center line. The tower above it tilted, windows shattered, stairways crumbling. Had the plane remained on the ground, it would have been trapped between ruptured asphalt and oncoming water. The passengers, now floating calmly above the clouds, had escaped a catastrophe measured in megatons, not minutes. At 1,500 feet, the Airbus was already clear of the valley, but Captain Mafella's instincts refused to settle. Something in the rhythm of the air felt unnatural, the kind of vibration no turbulence produces. He scanned the instruments. All normal. Outside the windshield, the bay shimmered strangely, as though light itself had fractured. Then, he saw it. The sea was pulling away from the shore in enormous spirals, concentric circles expanding outward. In seconds, those circles thickened, rising, folding, and curling toward the land. He had studied meteorology and ocean behavior, but nothing in the manuals prepared him for this. He later described it as the ocean breathing. What he watched from the sky was the birth of a tsunami. Below, from ground level, the scene was chaos. Cars tossed like toys, ships driven inland, neighborhoods erased. From the air, it looked almost silent, a slow rearrangement of the planet's surface. The co-pilot adjusted the TCAS and autopilot, glancing uneasily at the horizon. Mafella keyed the radio, trying to contact the tower. Static. He switched frequencies. Still nothing. He tried one last time, but the only sound was the low hum of interference. For the passengers, life went on as usual. A child asked for another juice box. Someone unfolded a newspaper. A businessman closed his eyes and listened to music. None of them realized they were looking down on one of the deadliest natural disasters in Indonesia's modern history. At that same moment, the control tower was collapsing. The final signal from Palu had already gone silent, and with it, the link between the world below and the aircraft above. Mafella kept his eyes fixed on the bay until it vanished into the dark. He would remember that view for the rest of his life. The sea rising, the city dimming, and the feeling that he had escaped by an invisible margin of time. Inside the 4-story tower at Palu Airport, Antonius Gunawan Agung was living the final minutes of his duty. The first tremor had thrown computers from their desks. Alarms wailed. Glass rained down like hail. His colleagues were already running, shouting for him to follow. But protocol held him in place. Until Flight 6231 cleared 2,500 feet, the airspace was his responsibility. The radar trace still glowed on the screen, a green dot moving steadily north. He stayed, gripping the console to keep his balance as the building rocked beneath him. Another tremor struck, stronger than before. The walls groaned. The stairwell split open. When he finally saw the aircraft's trace vanish from his radar, he exhaled for the last time as a controller. Only then did he rise from his seat to look for a way out. Every exit was blocked. Debris sealed the doors, and smoke filled the stairwell. Trapped 4 stories up, he radioed once more, but the line was dead. Outside, sirens screamed, and the horizon flickered with fires from ruptured fuel lines. Hours later, rescue workers found him barely conscious, pinned under metal beams, but still wearing his headset. They carried him out through a hole in the concrete and rushed him to a hospital already overflowing with quake victims. The roads were broken, and the helicopter meant to transfer him to a larger facility never arrived. He died that night from internal injuries at only 21 years old. His story spread across the nation. Newspapers called him the Guardian of the Sky. The president of Indonesia personally commended him for bravery, and Airnav Indonesia established a scholarship in his name for young air traffic trainees. During the reconstruction of Palu Airport, engineers built a new tower with seismic reinforcements. At its entrance stands a plaque engraved with his final transmission. Batik 6231 cleared for takeoff. Every controller who climbs those stairs knows his name, and every pilot who departs that runway remembers the man who stayed behind when the Earth itself tried to pull him down. Above the storm of ruin below, Flight 6231 cut through a layer of thin clouds, steady at cruising altitude. The hum of the engines was constant, precise, a rhythm that spoke of order while the world beneath fell apart. Inside the cabin, no one sensed the magnitude of what had just occurred. A baby slept on her mother's shoulder. A teenager scrolled through music. Flight attendants rolled a service cart down the aisle. In the cockpit, though, something felt off. Captain Ricoseta Mafella had flown for nearly 2 decades. He had felt turbulence, engine surges, even lightning strikes, but never this kind of silence. He adjusted the radio frequency and called the tower. Palu Tower, Batik 6231. Nothing. He tried again. Still no reply. The second officer leaned forward, checked the communication panel, and verified it was functioning. The frequency was correct. Power levels normal, but every attempt came back with the same emptiness. It wasn't just static, it was absence, a vacuum where life had been only minutes ago. Mafella's mind searched for logic. Maybe a power cut. Maybe their transceiver had failed. But deep down, the same instinct that urged him to take off early now whispered another truth. The voice that had cleared him for departure might no longer exist. What do you think that voice was? Instinct, faith, or something beyond what science can measure? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear how you interpret it. He didn't tell the passengers, of course. Routine had to be maintained. He issued calm instructions to his crew, checked coordinates, and climbed toward 32,000 feet, maintaining course for Makassar. Outside the window, the coastline stretched below like a wound, dark patches where neighborhoods once glowed. He could see small fires, long shadows, where the ground seemed to ripple unnaturally. An hour later, the first officer radioed the Makassar approach frequency. This time, a voice answered immediately. Normal. Composed. Batik 6231, radar contact. Cleared for descent. The normality of that voice felt jarring after so much silence. As the aircraft descended, the lights of Sultan Hassanuddin International Airport came into view, a halo of safety amid the night. The landing was smooth. Passengers clapped quietly, unaware they had flown through history. Then the phones came on. The first alerts blinked across screens. Breaking news: major earthquake and tsunami strike Palu, central Sulawesi. When morning came, the first daylight over Palu revealed not a city, but a wound in the earth. Entire neighborhoods were gone, erased as if scraped from the map. Roads that had once carried cars were now rivers of gray mud. Ships the size of buildings lay hundreds of meters inland, and people wandered through silence that still carried the echo of the sea. As rescue teams arrived from across Indonesia, they discovered that the disaster had been far worse than anyone imagined. Official reports from the National Disaster Management Agency, BNPB, confirmed more than 4,300 deaths, over 10,000 injured, and nearly 70,000 people displaced. The numbers would keep rising for weeks as new bodies were found beneath the liquefied soil. Palu Bay's shape, narrow and enclosed, had concentrated the tsunami's energy like a cannon. Some areas had seen waves more than 10 meters high. In that grim landscape, a single name began to spread across radios, television screens, and social media feeds: Antonius Gunawan Agung. The story of the 21-year-old air traffic controller, the one who stayed in his tower to clear a flight, rose from tragedy like a spark of light. His colleagues told reporters how he had refused to leave the control room until Flight 6231 disappeared from the radar. When they returned after the shaking, the tower was gone. Within days, Agung's face was everywhere, on banners, memorial posts, and news broadcasts. He became a symbol of duty and calm, a reminder that courage isn't defined by age or rank. President Joko Widodo personally sent condolences to his family. Airnav Indonesia posthumously awarded him the title Pahlawan Udara, Hero of the Sky. At his funeral in his hometown of Denpasar, soldiers carried his coffin draped in the red and white Indonesian flag. Thousands lined the streets, some holding candles, others standing silently in prayer. The crowd didn't see him as just a controller. They saw him as the spirit of everyone who chose responsibility over fear. His story transcended borders. International aviation schools began referencing his actions in their ethics and emergency training programs. The International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, recognized his conduct in its annual safety report, citing him as an example of professional dedication under catastrophic conditions. Months later, when Palu's airport reopened, a new control tower stood taller, reinforced against future quakes. At its base, a bronze plaque was fixed into the concrete. It reads, "He stayed until the sky was safe." Every controller who begins a shift at Mutiara Sis Al Jufriya Airport passes that plaque. Some touch it for luck. Others bow their heads for a second before stepping inside. They know that the airspace above Palu, those quiet, endless skies, is guarded by the memory of a young man who refused to leave his post, even as the world crumbled around him. For Indonesia, Antonius Gunawan Agung became more than a name in a report. He became a reminder of what holds a country together when the ground gives way. Not walls, not towers, but people who choose duty over survival. In the months that followed, scientists and journalists retraced the events of that night second by second. The data revealed a perfect alignment between human instinct and geological fury. Flight 6231's takeoff at 6:02 p.m., the magnitude 7.5 rupture at 6:05, and the tsunami's first impact within 6 minutes. A timeline so precise, it seemed scripted by something greater than chance. To some, Captain Ricoseta Mafella's decision was divine intervention. To others, it was instinct, the human brain's oldest survival tool. Psychologists and neuroscientists studying the disaster proposed another explanation: thin slicing, a process in which the subconscious detects patterns that the conscious mind cannot yet articulate. It's the same mechanism that warns soldiers of unseen ambushes or drives a firefighter to evacuate moments before a building collapses. In aviation, this kind of intuition is rare, but not unknown. Pilots spend thousands of hours absorbing environmental cues, engine tone, air pressure, subtle vibrations, until those sensations become part of their nervous system. Under extreme stress, the amygdala in the brain can override logic, pushing the body to act before reason catches up. As one researcher at Jakarta's National University of Neuroscience explained, instinct is not superstition. It's pattern recognition, happening faster than thought. That night, Mafella's subconscious may have registered something, perhaps a faint vibration through the tarmac, an atmospheric shift, or an inaudible change in engine resonance that triggered his decision to leave early. He didn't understand it. He just listened. Across Indonesia, religious communities interpreted his story differently. For many, the voice he heard was divine guidance, a moment of mercy written into the chaos. Mosques and churches in Palu both held memorials where clerics spoke of faith and fate acting together. The scientists called it intuition. The faithful called it providence. Both agreed on one thing, that listening to that whisper had saved lives. The same reports revealed another truth, that Antonius Gunawan Agung's sacrifice was not an isolated act of heroism, but part of a larger story of resilience. Across the city, teachers shielded students, doctors operated without light, and neighbors pulled strangers from rubble. Agung's final transmission became the symbol of all those silent acts that never made the news. The tragedy also reshaped Indonesia's disaster response. The government installed new tsunami sensors along the Palu Koro Fault and upgraded emergency sirens across the coastline. Aviation authorities revised safety training to include case studies of psychological intuition, teaching pilots when to trust data and when to trust the feeling behind it. Science, faith, and humanity converged that day in one of the rarest ways imaginable. A pilot's instinct, a controller's courage, and a nation's endurance had all unfolded in the same breath. 3 minutes had separated catastrophe from survival, but within those 3 minutes lay something far older than technology, an unspoken conversation between the human mind and the moving earth beneath it. Years later, when travelers step into Palu's modern terminal, they pass a quiet corner near the new tower. There, under soft light, stands a memorial engraved with 2 names, Captain Ricoseta Mafella and Antonius Gunawan Agung, and the words, 3 minutes, 1 decision, 148 lives. Visitors often stop to read, not because they know aviation, but because they understand what it means to make a choice without certainty. For pilots across Indonesia, the story of Flight 6231 has become a lesson not about luck, but about awareness, a reminder that machines obey logic, but survival sometimes answers to something deeper. Captain Mafella continued to fly for years after that night. Every time he taxied onto a runway, he touched a small photograph in his flight bag, the smiling face of the young man who once cleared him for takeoff. He said it reminded him that instinct is only half the equation. The other half is trust. For the people of Palu, recovery was slow but steady. The bay still glitters at sunset, but now it's lined with tsunami walls and early warning systems. Schools teach children to read the ocean's signs, and new homes stand on elevated ground. Yet, even with all the engineering and sensors, locals say the memory of that night still hums faintly beneath the soil. Because what happened on September 28, 2018, was more than a natural disaster. It was a moment when geography, courage, and conscience collided. A moment when a pilot's whisper and a controller's final breath drew a boundary between loss and salvation. True heroism doesn't always roar. It often begins in quiet choices, an unexplainable feeling, a voice no one else can hear, a duty that no one would fault you for abandoning. 3 minutes. That was all it took to write a story that would echo far beyond the skies of Palu. A story reminding us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act while it's still there. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes instinct is just coincidence. And for more stories where geography, humanity, and fate intersect, subscribe to Geologic, where every landscape hides a lesson, and every decision shapes the map of survival.